ahead and get started with the ecological system and just defining what that means. Okay, we're going to move this over because we don't need that. Okay, let's go ahead and look at the ecological system and what that means. This is a system that was created by Bronfenbrenner, and it essentially says that a child's development is dependent on everything that surrounds that child, both immediate and even things that are outside of their surroundings. And so it just looks at kind of the environment that contributes to a child's development. We start with a microsystem. A microsystem is the smallest and the most immediate environment in which the child lives. Because of that, the microsystem involves places like the home, school, daycare, peer groups, community environment of that child. Those things are going to contribute to that child's development. One of the takeaways that you can have from this is that interaction is also going to look different based on that individual as well. You can have the same siblings grow up in the same home, kind of go to the same school, and be in the same neighborhood, but their upbringing is going to be different simply because of their personal relationships with their microsystem. So it's important to note that the interactions within the microsystem involves the personal relationships with family members, classmates, teachers, caregivers, things like that. Okay, next you have the mesosystem, and this is the interactions of different microsystems which children find themselves in. In essence, this system involves the linkage between home and schools and neighborhoods and work and so on and so forth. So it's between peer group and family, between family and community, things like that contribute to the child's development. So if there's any conflict between these systems, that's going to lead to negative development and the child. Okay, next you have exosystem, and this is the linkage that exists between two or more settings, one of which may not contain the developing child, but is going to indirectly affect them nonetheless. So an example of this is mass media, community service, the child's school, the parent's workplace. An example on the parent's workplace is if mom is getting passed up at work and she's having a really difficult time at work, doesn't get the promotion that she wants, her coworkers give her a really hard time, though that affects her in her environment, she's going to come out and take it out on her child. Or if she mistreats the kids, then that's mom's work environment affects the child. And so that's basically what that is saying. It's saying that even in the places that children are not, those environments are going to affect them. Okay, the next one is macrosystem. This is the largest and the most distant collection of people and places that to that child, but still has an impact and influences them in one way or another. And so this is the widely shared cultural values, beliefs, customs, and laws, and things like that they might not have a direct ties to, but it's going to affect them anyway. So an example of this is looking at the cultural aspect and even what's happening in that society as these kids grow up. If, for example, a child that grows up in a war zone is going to have a very different upbringing than a child that grows up in a more peaceful country, or the laws that are going to impact that child's development, even though they didn't really have a say in, what the laws are of that time. Okay. Some of Bronfenbrenner's ecological system includes a chronosystem, and that just acknowledges the changes over time. This suggests that adding time is just an important dimension to look at both the change and the consistency in that child's environment. So it looks at the changes in family structure, address, parents' employment status. These things that are happening, that are transitioning, is going to impact that child, is essentially what that's saying. Okay, so these are the things that we think about when we say, what are the systems and the environments that are at play that influence the child's development? Another perspective that we can look at, and it's kind of similar to the chrono system, is the life course perspective. And that allows us to look at the role that time plays in an individual's life, and specifically the interactions between the individuals who move through different roles across different historical contexts. Let me kind of break that down. Basically, what I'm trying to say by definition is that this is the interaction of historical events, individual decisions and opportunities, and the effects of early life experiences that determine later life outcomes. And I'll break this down a little bit. We could talk about it. But essentially says that people move through different roles, like being a student or a parent or a spouse or a worker, and everybody kind of like you transition into different milestones. But your specific historical context is an important thing to consider, right? And that is going to play a role in how you participate in that role. So a student in the 1900s is going to look different than a student in 2021. That's what that's saying. Another thing that the life course perspective considers is how the way that society is shaped and the rules and the laws of that time is going to make an impact on people's life. An example of that is, actually, I think the next slide says it. Okay. Social institutions are woven from the experiences of groups of men and women born at the same time, such as baby boomers. Okay, so let's look at that quote. That's essentially saying that the specific context where baby boomers were born and grew up in is an important context to consider of like the life that they lived. Social change affects different birth cohorts in different ways. So the typical school day in the US right now might be somewhere between 9 and 3 p.m., right? And there's a 3-month summer vacation that takes place. And that reflects what was kind of happening when we had a primarily agricultural economy and that relied on the support of children during crop tending seasons. So even though we use the schedule today, this schedule was created so that it can cater to that agricultural economy. And so that children could help their parents and things like that. Some of the conversations that lawmakers have had is the idea of enrolling kids in school throughout the whole year, simply because that 3-month summer vacation is not something that's necessary, considering that they don't have to participate in crop tending seasons. Again, the whole point of life course perspective is it's important to consider the historical context and to understand the interactions of specific role that person plays in that specific time. Okay. Again, not all kids are going to, express being a kid in the same way. Not all adults across different historic contexts were adults in the same way. Okay. That's the life course perspective. Let's talk about cultural competence. And this is what we want to be able to develop, right? And what do we mean when we say cross-cultural competence? This is the capability and the will of a provider to respond to the unique needs of an individual client, which arise from the client's culture, and to use that client's cultural strength as a tool in the healing and helping process. Cultural competence involves 3 aspects. Those 3 aspects are an awareness, knowledge, and skill. So the attainment of knowledge regarding beliefs and values usually the place of, and so that part is just knowing what is important to know. And even on the aspect of awareness, it's important to know what the practitioner or that service provider also believes in. It's a level of like knowledge, right? But that awareness is essential. The ability to communicate effectively through an accurate exchange of information, perception, and instruction, and preferences with regard to that client's presenting condition and related history. So you need that knowledge, and it's important to have an accurate information. And then skills and behavior that will enable the practitioner to provide appropriate services for diverse population. Does the service provider, whether social services practitioner, agency, etc., know how to navigate and help and service people that come from different cultures? That's important. So awareness, knowledge, and skill. Okay. Culture. You can find so many different definitions on culture, but I really like this definition, and this is one I want to work with even in future videos. And when I reference culture, this is kind of what I'm talking about. So I think this gives us a good foundation. Culture is the integrated pattern of socially transmitted human behavior and includes thoughts, communications, actions, customs, beliefs, values, and institutions, and all other products of human work and thought. Characteristics of particular community or population. Culture is a set of guidelines, both explicit and implicit, which individuals inherit as members of a particular society, and which tells them how to view the world, how to experience it emotionally, and how to behave in relation to other people, to supernatural forces, and gods, and to the natural environment. I really like this definition. Acculturation. This is the process of adopting the cultural trait or social pattern of a group other than one's own. In regards to immigrant groups, acculturation is a process of incorporating values, beliefs, and behaviors from a dominant culture into the immigrant cultural's worldview. When we talk about just our Habesha parents moving to the U.S. And kind of their process, this is what we're talking about, is how much of the American culture has our Ethiopian parents adopted, and what's kind of been their process in incorporating American values, beliefs, and behaviors into their world, right? We'll talk a lot about that, but that's what we mean. Bicultural identity